Welcome to another edition of the Missions Mantle from Fellowship International Mission. I'm here with Tim and Barbara Lee Glessner, FIM missionaries in Mexico. It was a real joy to be with you guys in Mexico just a couple of months ago, and other FIM missionaries down there. Got to know a little bit about your work, but if you could just tell us and our FIM family and some of our listeners today how the Lord called you to the city of Puebla. First of all, you got to tell how when I think of Mexico, I think of heat, cactus, desert, but where you live, it's really quite a beautiful place. So tell us a little bit about that and how the Lord called you to Puebla.
Yeah, we're at Puebla, which is southeast of Mexico City, and it's up at 7,000 feet. So it's a very temperate climate, perfect place, just weather-wise. So big city, 2 million people. So we have Costco, Sam's, Walmart, Krispy Kreme, all those types of places. So it's not the typical sombrero guy sitting under a cactus, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
How did the Lord call you to Puebla? You've been there serving for about 15 years. What was it that inspired in your hearts to think about the needs of the people there?
Well, I tend to think my experience is mostly with a young church, with young believers, new believers. I think that's kind of in my comfort zone because you don't have to deal with a lot of the issues that come from age, I guess, and being stuck in your ways and this is the way we've always done it sort of thing. But new believers with all their problems, with all their growing issues, with all the things they don't know, and the sins and issues that you have to deal with that. So that tends to be kind of where I've come from and what's interesting, or how I think and what we've dealt with mostly in Mexico. So those are the issues. But I'm a person that appreciates a lot of balance. So we try, even in our church now in Puebla, we try to mix hymns and choruses. We try to mix a healthy appreciation of old things with new things and balance. And I think things are healthier when you have that. Obviously, believers who've loved and walked with the Lord for many years have an awful lot that they can give as long as they're healthy and growing and loving the Lord to new believers. And so those are the things that we very much appreciate. And our church in Puebla, when we started it, we had a nice mix there, and I'm very thankful for that.
You've been training your church leaders and teaching in the church, but there are some characteristics that you'd really like to see part of the identity or the DNA of the church plant there in Puebla Nueva. What are some of those character traits that a local church really ought to exhibit to be a healthy church? Well,
the qualities, as a church planning team, when we started off, and this is 5 years ago, we kind of identified 7 traits and 7 qualities that we wanted to exhibit and to live as a church. And we really worked on doing that. And they're grace and integrity and teachability, a church that's always learning. And then we have service and unity and faith and joy. And so those are the things that we've tried to live out and encourage and teach and remind ourselves regularly. This is what we're about.
You got to write a book, because Mark Dever wrote a book, The 9 Marks of a Healthy Church, and you've got 7, which is a lot easier to remember than 9. But as I think about that, that's really the church that ought to be the church everywhere, not just in Puebla, but to be starting a church, a young church in this community that really needed a church when you guys were there. There really wasn't a gospel-centered ministry there, and you focused on these things, and so from the very beginning, they're seeing what a healthy church ought to be.
For me, I studied Spanish in high school and college and took a semester to study in Spain, and during that time really felt like the Lord was planting that idea in me to do missions and maybe teach English and work with the church there in Spain, but led me in the path of Tim, and he had a desire to go to Mexico, and that was something that came from high school on a missions trip, and then a time right after college being in Mexico City for a year.
Wow, that's really awesome. You guys know our story a little bit. I've been a pastor for 34 years, serving in the U.S., and so when I think of church growth and church health, I kind of think of it just because of my experience in the U.S. context. Tim, when you think of a healthy church and a reproducing church, how does that look? What does that look like? Not only in Puebla, but really the church anywhere. How would you describe a healthy church, and how are you trying to establish that for the church plant work that you're doing in Puebla?
Mm-hmm.
And they're trying to direct the efforts of the church in that way to meet those examples and those character traits that ought to be there. So super exciting, and wish I could have you at a church here in the U.S. doing the same thing, but because really those are the things that every church needs and ought to have. So you have an opportunity to learn that from Tim and Barbara Lee, missionaries with FIM. You can learn about their ministry at www.fim.org.